Alright, so for the past week, this deck has been my baby. Like, I picked up the Bastion deck and some extras that one of my buddies had, and then I proceeded to order the rest of what I was missing just so I could play this deck. Like, I've been wanting to play this deck for such a while, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to pick up another nation or not. But then I was like, dude, this game is so cheap. There's no reason for you not to pick up another nation. You want to play this deck? Fuck it, play this deck. Phantom Blaster Overlord. The misconceptions and what it actually is. Let's get into it. One of the most important parts of this deck is Persona Ride. Now, usually when people Persona Ride, it's not really a plus. It's a cycle, because when you Persona Ride, you get to draw a card. But this is a +1, not just when you Persona Ride, every time you ride, which means even the ride deck. This is a +1 to board every time you ride, because it gets to pull out a blaster from Soul. You will always have a blaster in Soul, because every time you ride on top, you have at least a grade 3. There's no reason not to run this card at 3 copies. Ooh, and especially if we get more blasters in the future, it would just become even more. I do know we have one blaster support card in set 3, but that's really not that good in my opinion. We might have to run it anyways, because we don't have much of a choice, but this is what I'm running with right now. 3 PBDs. And then 3 copies of Blaster Dark. You want to max out on Blaster Dark. He's your main attacker. If you, important part is if you pop the card. If you pop the card, he gets the extra 5k on your turn. But also a very important ability, especially when it comes to the over trigger, is that he can pop cards on rear. I didn't know that. My first couple days testing this deck, I thought that was only Vanguard ability. I didn't know that you could do the sack one on the rear guard circle. And I'm just like, this makes this deck better than I first thought it was. I'm like, oh damn, I can only pop 2 in a turn. No, I can pop 3 in a turn. With Burner, it could be like a 3 for 3, technically. But you just want to max out copies of this, obviously. And then for our last grade 2, I am running 4 Makas. The reason I'm running Maka at 4, even though you really don't have Soul in this deck because of your Vanguard's ability to pull one out from Soul, and then Maka, you could realistically only use Maka like 2-3 times maximum if you don't if you Persona Road and chose not to pull out. But it's just such a good card that you really want to see this like by turn 2. It's such a good card that you really want to see it by turn 2 because of its ability to sack a rear, check top 5, call a grade 1 or less from and just its ability to deck thin, and the fact that it becomes a beater by itself is just very valuable in this deck, especially if you're like on a snowball. You could snowball with this deck because it does such intense deck thinning. Like, this is, I don't think there's any other deck in the Overdress format that does as much deck thinning as Phantom does right now in the current format. So that's why we're maxing out copies of her, even though realistically you can only use her second ability like twice. But she's just such valuable that there's no reason not to run her at 3 copies. And then on to the grade 1s, which is one of the more important parts of this deck because of Maka's ability. You're running 3 Javelin. Javelin is a beater and a booster. This is such a good card, especially if you're going second or going first. What am I talking about? You always want to call this card on turn, the first turn you attack. You always want to call this card just because it swings for 8, and then not 8. It swings for 10. It swings for 10. So if your opponent's at grade 1, it swings. If your opponent's at grade 2, it swings. So that's why we're maxing out copies of this, just because it's an attacker and it's a booster. It's literally everything you want in a grade 1. Well, not everything you want in a grade 1. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. And then 4 copies of Charon. This is like my favorite card in the deck. This card lets you know if you're getting triggers. Because of its ability to look at the top, like, oh, trigger? Yeah, leave that on top for me. Oh, not a trigger? I'll call it. It's just really, it makes really good food for Phantom. And the times that it doesn't make good food for Phantom, you know you're going to check at least one trigger in that turn, so you can plan accordingly. It's just really important that you do max this out at 4 copies, because it works so well with Maka, where it turns Maka's deck thin into a +1. Because if you call a rear from Charon's ability, it's gonna retire itself at the end of the turn. So you retire with Maka, and then you get to keep the unit that would have otherwise been retired if you're not using it. If you're not using it as Phantom Blaster food. So that's why you really want to max out on Charon's. And then for Burner, I don't like this card. I don't like this card because its only ability is it counts as 2. It counts as 2 as food for your Phantom. I don't like it. I wish it did something else. I really wish it wasn't 5K. I don't understand why it was 5K either. Like, being 8K, like, I would still not like this card. Well, no, I would actually like this card more if it was 8K. But it's 5K, so it just like, you really don't want to see this card until later, or if you're setting up for your turn 3 or 4. So most of the time when I do see this in my opening hand, I try to shuffle it back because I don't value it in the early game. It's more of a mid to late game card. Because there's many times, because of the way I play this deck, that my board is full or almost full. It becomes full when I ride this. Because this deck is just so good at making 10, 18, and 25K columns in the early game that you just generally play out all your units. And you can't really be punished. Well, you technically can be punished. You can't really, like, they can't backwards aggress you because you just have the ability. You just have the ability to pop with your Blaster Darks. Or your ride deck Blaster Darks, and then your rear guard Blaster Darks. So like, you want to attack my rears? That's cool, man. But Blaster Dark and Charon are gonna have some words. we're gonna have some words with your rear guards. So I don't think this deck is as bad as people think it is. It's just really it's not really an overdress deck because of the way it plays. It's a very aggressive tempo deck, I would say, because you're trying to play, not tempo deck. It's a very aggressive, like, more like not really mid range, I guess, rush deck. But anyways, 4 perfect guards. Again, maxing out on perfect guards, and the reason I'm showing them for this portion of the video is because it is a grade 1 that you can call off of Maka. Which, in Lorinal, when you're facing up against Lorinal, you don't really care if you call these off of Maka. Like, the deck thing is still the deck thing. But you really, maxing out on the perfect guards, because obviously you need as many copies as you can get. And then there's so many things that I tried for these slots, for these last 5 cards for the main deck. Not main, I mean normal units, These last 5 cards, I tried the grade 3, what's his name? Fasado. I tried Fasado because in theory, Fasado works really well in this deck because it gives you a counter charge and gives you a soul charge, so you can use Makas more often. But the problem with that is it needs to hit. The other problem with that is it's a grade 3, so I can't call it on turn 1 or turn 2. So I took Fasados out the deck just because it really wasn't as useful as intended. And then the other card I tried it's a grade 2, I forget what it was called, Transcendent something, that on place, but it can only be placed from hand, so you really can't snowball it out with Charons. On place, you rest another rear, and then you random top call from the deck, which I didn't like it that much because it's an on place from hand, and then it's also a grade 2, so I really, I wasn't feeling that card, so I took it out. And what I actually settled on was really weird, but it really works out for this deck. 4 more copies of, what's it called? This is basically 4 more copies of Blaster Javelin, except it's only a 10k booster, which is just, again, really good for the turns. You want to be the aggressor turns 1, 2, and 3. You want to make 3 attacks on your first turn if your opponent lets you. That's why we're running so many grade 1s. And then for the last grade 1 of the deck, we are running 1 Prescription Angel. I didn't know what else to run, and I had 1 copy of this card. What Prescription Angel does is that she does allow you to guard from the damage zone. So, like, ideal scenario, the one of Prescription Angel you have on the board, you're facing Lorinol. Ideal scenario, you have a face up PG, you counterblast, you PG from the damage zone, you have a great time, because Lorinol only says you can't PG from hand. But any shield that you have in the damage zone, you can just revalue it out. Like, so that's why we're running the 1 copy of Prescription Angel. You can dig it out with Maka, so it's really not that much of an issue running it at 1. But I really haven't found, like, the correct situation to where is, yes, I want this card. But there's really no other card that I would rather run versus the Prescription Angel. So I'm just like, it may be a fringe scenario, but if I have access to it, I have access to it. And then on to the triggers. The trigger lineup in this deck is actually pretty standard. So we're running 7 crits, 4 heals, 4 of the 20k front triggers, just because there's so much value in checking fronts in this deck that I just had to max out copies of them for the 20k fronts. And then 1 of the Overtrigger. The Overtrigger actually works really well in this deck, especially if you planning accordingly based on what you checked off the top card of Karen. If you check the top card Overtrigger, then it becomes more valuable for you to use your Blaster Dark's ability, pop 1 to pop another on your opponent's turn, because it gives Blaster Dark an extra drive check. So it's really not a -1 to pop, it's a break even, because you're going to be getting drive checks off from your Overtrigger's ability. I usually give the 100 million to the weakest, the one column that's doing the single check, because that's usually the weakest column versus Blaster Dark, because at least he could swing 15 by himself to drive. And yeah, that's my PBD deck. I don't think the deck is as bad as people make it out to be. I could say bottom tier 2. Like, the deck is just really good at what it does, and it's thinning cards out of your deck and pushing your opponent as hard and as fast as possible for little to no recourse. But like, comment, subscribe down below. I will be definitely getting some videos out with this deck, just showing you how I play it and how crazy the deck thinning can be in this deck. So yeah, later.